Growing up, I always felt overshadowed by my sister, whom my parents deemed a prodigy. They believed that having one successful child was sufficient and bluntly told me that they couldn't afford a failure like me. They laid down an ultimatum. If I could contribute $12,000 monthly for rent, perhaps I could stay. Unable to meet their demands, I faced the stark reality of being expelled from my own home. However, during this turbulent period, my uncle stepped in. Despite his modest means, he offered to take me in, saying, "Louisa, I might not have much, but I'd be proud to be your parent." Without hesitation, I accepted his gracious offer. Now, at 35, I reflect on my complex family dynamics, starting from my childhood. My father, a typical office worker, and my stay-at-home mother raised us in a multi-generational home, which included my unmarried uncle. At 8 years old, I began living with my 29-year-old uncle, who never left our family home due to his frail health and unstable employment. He worked part-time jobs as his health allowed, but it was never enough to support independent living. Despite his circumstances, my uncle bore quiet guilt, feeling like a burden as he relied on his parents. I often witnessed my father scornfully chastising him, especially when my grandparents weren't around to see. My father's behavior always puzzled me, and I remember innocently asking my uncle why he never retaliated. He replied that he truly was dependent on their support, a humble acceptance of his situation. As I grew older, I realized my father, too, depended on his parents' support, making his criticisms of my uncle hypocritical. If only I had grasped this sooner, I might have stood up for my uncle. Life at home felt serene when my grandparents were present, creating a protective bubble around my uncle and allowing his gentle spirit to shine through. However, everything changed dramatically after my grandparents passed away in an accident when I was 8. The loss devastated us deeply, and while my sister and I mourned, I distinctly remember seeing my uncle cry quietly. Contrarily, my father's reaction was chilling. He laughed. This haunting laughter at such a sorrowful time revealed a stark contrast in his character, an image that has remained with me ever since. These early experiences shaped my understanding of family loyalty, resilience, and the complexities of human emotions, setting the stage for the challenging yet formative years that would follow under my uncle's care. From a young age, I sensed something unsettling about my father's reaction to grief, which became unmistakably clear during my grandparents' funeral. While everyone else was somber, I caught a glimpse of my father's face when he thought no one was watching. He wasn't confused or saddened. He was smiling with genuine joy. To a child, his daughter, it was a jarring sight. This wasn't a nervous reaction to grief, but a smile that seemed to relish the financial benefits their passing might bring. This realization terrified me and brought me to tears, which others might have mistaken for mourning. During this distressing moment, my uncle, contrasting sharply with my father, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. His eyes, though sad, radiated warmth and concern for me. It struck me even then how differently two brothers could react to the same tragic event. After the funeral, my father's behavior towards my uncle grew increasingly harsh. He openly questioned why he should support someone he viewed as worthless and even threatened to take the entire inheritance, stating that my uncle should be grateful just for being allowed to live in the house. Legally, the inheritance was supposed to be divided equally, but my father wanted to monopolize it. Despite the injustice, my uncle, burdened by his frailty and poor health, chose not to fight back. His passive acceptance and the daily verbal abuses he suffered from my father only worsened his condition, leading to noticeable weight loss and a pale complexion. Concerned, I once asked him if he was okay. He simply smiled weakly and said, "I'm frail, and things aren't going well with my job, so it can't be helped." His gentle demeanor in the face of such adversity was both heartbreaking and infuriating. For months after our grandparents' death, my uncle was driven out of the house. My father's cruel words, "You're useless, get out," still echo in my memory. As he was leaving, I desperately pleaded with him not to go. He calmly removed his hand from mine, placed it on my shoulder, and reassured me, "Don't worry, Louisa, you're strong. You'll be okay even without me." I responded, concerned for his well-being, but I'm worried about you." He tried to comfort me with a simple, "It's okay," before he walked away. His departure was a profound loss for me, a young child who could do nothing more than watch. 5 years later, life continued to move forward. I was 11, regularly attending elementary school, and my sister Kayla was about to start her education too. Little did I know, more challenges awaited me as my life was about to take another dramatic turn. When my mother shared that Kayla had been commended for her sharpness in kindergarten, my father immediately attributed it to his genes, exclaiming with pride that her intelligence must surely come from him. He impulsively decided that Kayla should take an IQ test to prove her brilliance. We were all stunned by the results. Kayla scored an IQ of 150. "This is my DNA," my father boasted, thrilled by the number that seemed monumental, though I didn't fully grasp its significance at the time. I understood only that Kayla was exceptionally bright. "That's amazing, Kayla." I cheered her on, and she beamed back at me with joy. Those were the moments of pure happiness amidst our family dynamics. However, the positive atmosphere soon shifted. My father was quick to act on the news of Kayla's intelligence, declaring, "Let's have her take entrance exams." My mother, initially surprised by the sudden decision, was soon swept up in his enthusiasm, convinced by his belief that Kayla's talent would carry her through. From that point, Kayla's schedule filled with daily tutoring sessions, and my mother, accompanying her, began to neglect her household duties. This shift in responsibilities soon landed on me. "Since your mother and Kayla are busy, you'll take care of the house," I was instructed. Thus, laundry and cleaning became my post-school routine. My afternoons were no longer free for play. I had to rush home to finish chores or face scolding. There were days I skipped meals for not keeping up with the housework. "You're a failure. We can't spare time for you." They chided me when I couldn't maintain perfect grades like Kayla. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" my parents would lament, completely overlooking my own achievements, whether academic or athletic. The constant comparisons to Kayla were demoralizing. "It's impossible for you, but Kayla is a genius. You're just incompetent." As Kayla excelled in her tutoring and breezed through her entrance exams, my parents' indifference toward me grew colder. They lavished resources on Kayla, new clothes, delicious meals, and trips. In contrast, I made do with hand-me-downs, leftovers, and solitude at home. "This child has a promising future. She'll secure our old age," my father would boast about Kayla, speculating on whether she should become a doctor, a lawyer, or even a politician. Amidst these discussions, I felt invisible, my presence barely acknowledged. Then, when I was just 15 years old, my parents coldly told me they had decided that having one child was enough. "We don't need a failure like you. Kayla needs a lot of money to develop her talents, so unless you can pay a monthly rent of $1,200, we might reconsider," they stated bluntly. Shocked and unable to comprehend how they could say this, I protested, but they were unmoved. "Contact your uncle for now. Here's some pocket money, figure it out on your own," they said as they handed me a little cash and drove me out of the house. I remember crying and banging on the door, pleading to be let back in, but it remained closed. In utter despair, I headed to the train station. Even at such a young age, I managed to navigate the journey, asking for directions along the way until I finally arrived at the apartment where my uncle lived. When the doorbell rang at my uncle's apartment, he greeted me with his characteristically kind face, though a look of surprise quickly took over. After I stepped inside and shared my heartbreaking story, my uncle couldn't hide his anger. "What are they doing?" he exclaimed. Although his words were not directed at me, I felt a deep sense of guilt for being cast out by my own parents, and tears began to well up in my eyes. In that emotional moment, my uncle placed a comforting hand on my head, a hand I remembered well for its warmth and size, filled with compassion. "It must have been hard, but don't worry anymore," he reassured me gently. However, reality set in as he admitted, "As you see, I'm prone to illness and don't have much income." "I'm poor," he said with a wry smile. His expression was more resolved than before, perhaps hardened by the distance from my father's toxic influence. Looking directly at me, he offered, "I'm poor, Louisa, but if you don't mind, I want to be your parent." I'd like to become your foster father. I might not be very reliable, though. Before he could finish, I had already leaped into his arms. His chest was similar to my father's, but radiated a completely different energy, one of security and love. You don't have to worry about anything anymore, he said as I cried with relief, feeling the deep love of a true parent. Life with my uncle was not easy. He was indeed poor and frequently ill, but our home was filled with smiles and laughter, emotions I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a modest household, but warm and full of love. My uncle always praised my efforts, regardless of the outcome, and encouraged me to keep striving. This support helped me gradually forget about my parents who had never recognized my worth. Over the years, I grew up healthy and cared for under my uncle's roof. 20 years flew by, and I found myself a 35-year-old woman facing my elderly parents after a long separation. My father, now visibly aged and with thinning hair, greeted me with a smile that seemed to erase the past. "Louisa, have you been well?" he asked, attempting to bridge years of neglect with casual familiarity. My response was icy, reflecting the unresolved pain. "What do you want now?" I asked, skeptical of his sudden reappearance. Unfazed, my father suggested, "Let's let bygones be bygones and get along as a family from now on." His proposal was absurd to me. "What are you talking about? Get along as a family? You must be joking," I retorted, hinting at the impossibility of simply forgetting their abandonment. Seeing my resistance, my father's old dismissiveness surfaced. "A failure always has a bad attitude. Can't be helped. Maybe it's time to re-educate you," he said condescendingly. "That's enough. Please go back home," I firmly replied, stopping him from entering. At that point, my mother chimed in, exacerbating the tension. "Louisa, don't be stubborn and accept our help. You surely can't be happy living in such a rundown apartment," she insisted. "You have nothing to do with this. Please leave," I responded, my patience wearing thin. "No need to be so haughty." "Come on, let us in," she persisted. "No, just go home," I repeated, standing my ground. "Let us in. Go home." Despite their age, my parents pushed with more strength than I had anticipated. It could have been because there were two of them, making it difficult for me to hold them back. We struggled back and forth like children in a game of push and shove, but I managed to maintain my composure until my father tried to cross the threshold into my apartment. That was when I firmly pushed them back. The force of it sent both of my parents tumbling to the ground, landing awkwardly on their backsides. Standing over them, I couldn't hide my frustration. "You're so annoying. What did you just say?" "I'm busy, so can you just leave already?" I demanded. "How can you speak to us that way? Do you even see us as your parents anymore?" they retorted. "I stopped considering you my parents the moment you threw me away," I responded sharply. "But we took care of you until you were 15, they argued. "Until I was 15, huh? The only time I felt truly cared for was when my grandparents were around," I countered. "Just because I survived doesn't give you the right to act all high and mighty." As they struggled to their feet, holding their backs, my parents looked much diminished. Despite being in their 50s, they seemed much older, as if in their 70s. "You were the ones who said Kayla was enough. With your genius daughter, there's no reason for you to come see me now," I pointed out coldly. "Well, it's not so simple anymore," my father said, grimacing. "Did something happen to Kayla? What? Did she end up in need or something?" I asked half-mockingly. "She became a lawyer." "Well, then there's no problem, right?" "That's amazing. Just what you'd expect from someone with an IQ of 150, I continued, a bit sarcastically. "Or so we thought, until she suddenly disappeared," my father revealed, his irritation evident. "That's quite surprising," I remarked, genuinely taken aback as I listened further. It turned out that Kayla had indeed made it through law school, passed the bar exam on her second attempt, and became a fully licensed lawyer. Then, inexplicably, she had left a note saying, "I won't be taking care of you too," and vanished. "So, in short, she's abandoned you." "Congratulations," I said dryly. "There's nothing to celebrate." That ungrateful child. After all we did to raise her, this is how she repays us, they lamented. Well, I guess that's what happens when love is lacking, I observed. The truth was, while my parents might have lavished my sister with attention, it likely felt more like suffocating control to her. Actually, the company went under, my father added, changing the subject. Given the times, that's not surprising. We barely got any severance pay, and the unemployment benefits are about to run out. That sounds rough, I said, my voice flat and disinterested. That's why we want you to take care of us, they suddenly demanded, erasing any semblance of sympathy from my expression.
No.
What did you say? How can you just abandon your parents like that? They exclaimed in disbelief. The only real parent I have is my uncle, who has taken care of me since I was 15, I stated firmly, leaving my father speechless. You knew I was living with my uncle when you came to this apartment, didn't you? So, why are you acting surprised now? Do you think of him as your father? My father challenged. My uncle, who gave me genuine love, is my true father, I declared, my words making it clear that parents who don't show love aren't truly parents. My uncle might have been sick and weak, but he still worked hard to support and care for me, proving his love through actions, not just words. This left my parents stunned, unable to respond to the truth of my feelings. I worked hard because I wanted to give back for all the sacrifices my uncle made for me. Wait, does that mean you actually have a proper job? My father asked with a hint of disbelief. Well, kind of, I replied nonchalantly, shrugging my shoulders. Suddenly, my father's grip tightened on my shoulder. Let go of me, I demanded, feeling a mix of anger and embarrassment. You're angry and a bit embarrassed too, aren't you? Please listen to what I'm saying, he insisted. No need to listen. I understand it all. You were lonely, weren't you? You're sulking because only your sister got all the attention, right? But deep down, you're happy to see your parents, aren't you? He suggested, trying to read my feelings. Stop creating your own story. Don't worry, from now on, we'll be proper parents and stay by your side, he continued, oblivious to the absurdity of his words. I stared at my parents blankly for a moment, their ridiculous expressions driving me to burst out laughing. Why are you laughing? Is it because you're happy? My father asked, hoping for a positive reaction. Not at all, I said between laughs. Just so, you know, in the past 15 years, I never once thought about either of you. Thanks to my uncle, I had a fulfilling life. As my parents stared at me in shock, I went on. Actually, I received a scholarship and graduated from university.
Oh, really?
Then you must have gotten into a good company, my mother said, catching on to the conversation. Yes, I did. I got a job at a well-known big corporation, I affirmed. That's great to hear, my mother replied, a hint of pride in her voice. And through an unexpected connection, I also got married. Oh, well then, I have to meet the groom and give my greetings, she insisted. No, that won't be necessary. He's currently overseas, I interjected.
Oh, I see.
Wait, what? By the way, your uncle is also overseas, my father asked, surprised. Yes, my uncle too. I thought you knew I was living here alone. Don't go assuming my uncle is dead. He got a job assignment abroad, and since it's in a place with a good environment for his health, he went along. Now he's happily spending time playing with my kids. You have kids too. My parents were almost too stunned to process all the surprises I was throwing at them. With their bewilderment on full display, I smiled brightly. At first, Uncle wasn't keen on living together with us, but he eventually agreed. Now we're all living happily, as one family. Well, in that case, we could move overseas too, my father suggested hopefully. Sure, go ahead. But we won't live together, and I won't be taking care of you. You're free to do what you want with your own money, I said firmly. That's impossible. Are you really going to abandon your parents? He asked, disbelief coloring his tone. You're the ones who abandoned me first, I retorted, my patience finally snapping at their selfish demands. My parents' faces turned pale. I have no gratitude toward you for anything, but I owe a great deal to my uncle. From now on, I intend to repay him for all he's done for me. That may be so, But at least send us a little money, please, my mother pleaded weakly. Uncle never touched the money I sent him and continued to live in this old apartment the whole time. But now, he's finally agreed to leave here and live with us overseas. I'm just here to finalize the paperwork. What about us? Are you just going to leave your mother and me behind? My father asked in shock. I nodded clearly. Thank you for abandoning me, I said with a smile, leaving them speechless. Truly thank you. Because of you, I'm happy now, I added, turning away, ready to start my new life overseas, leaving behind the shadows of my past. As I walked past them, I posed a final question that echoed the irony of our parted ways. How does it feel to be abandoned by the daughter you once discarded? There was no reply. Without waiting for an answer, I turned away, sensing that this farewell marked the definitive end to any emotional ties with my so-called real parents. Afterward, I returned to my new home overseas. Life had taught me resilience and hard work, virtues that Uncle had instilled in me. My perseverance paid off, securing a job at a reputable company, and later an opportunity arose to work abroad. It was there I met the man who would become my husband. Uncle, overwhelmed with joy, wept as he celebrated our union. Soon after, we welcomed children into our family and invited Uncle to live with us. Now we all live happily together, my husband, our children, and of course my uncle. One day, as we watched the kids play in the garden, my sister, who had joined us overseas, expressed a hopeful sentiment. I hope I can meet someone wonderful like you did, big sis, she said with a smile. Don't worry, you'll find someone great. You're finally free from our parents' control, I reassured her with a smile. That being said, I need to get used to this new job, my sister mused. Why not try getting a law license in this country? I suggested, half joking. I'm not interested in being a lawyer anymore. I've had enough of doing what our parents wanted. I want to take on a job that I truly want to do, she replied firmly. You're right, I agreed. After our parents had effectively disowned me, a letter from my sister arrived at Uncle's house. In it, she described how she was suffering under the weight of her parents' excessive expectations and pressure. After discussing it with Uncle, we secretly arranged to meet her on her way home from school. We maintained contact without our parents knowing. My sister yearned to live with us, but Uncle's financial situation made it impossible to support both of us. More so, our parents would never have allowed it. She endured living with them until she reached adulthood and could plan her escape. It was a grueling ordeal, but she persevered and finally gained her independence. As our parents were busy celebrating her success as a lawyer, she seized the moment to move out and start her own life, with my support. Although she secured a job here, she's struggling to adapt to the new language and environment. But I'm sure she'll be fine. I comforted myself. There's no one more resilient and hardworking than my sister, who withstood our parents' strict upbringing. On another positive note, Uncle was taking new steps too. He's planning to attend a language school, I told her, and she nodded with a smile. That's great. It's never too late to learn, she responded. His health has improved significantly, allowing him the freedom to enjoy life more fully now. You're absolutely right, I affirmed. Meanwhile, our parents had quickly depleted their resources after recklessly squandering the inheritance. Despite their investments in my sister, they eventually lost their jobs, and after selling the house, found themselves with very little, burdened by home improvement loans. They had started asking relatives for financial help, a stark testament to their continued imprudence. The word around the family was that everyone had turned their backs on my parents, leaving them to face their later years in poverty. A relative mentioned that arguments between them had become a regular occurrence. Reflecting on all that had transpired, I shared my thoughts with my sister. There should never be favoritism between siblings or any unfair treatment of one's children, I asserted. You're absolutely right, my sister agreed, nodding her head in strong affirmation. No matter what happens, I'll always be here to support you, Kayla. I promised, my voice filled with determination. You've already done more than enough. Thank you so much, big sis, Kayla replied, her gratitude evident. Witnessing how much my sister had matured and come into her own brought tears to my eyes. What do you mean by support? Her question was soft, curious. As we spoke, I suddenly felt a familiar, yet slightly smaller, warm hand on my shoulder. Turning around, my eyes squinted into a smile at the touch. "Thank you, huh?" I uttered as I faced Uncle, who stood there looking as surprised as I felt. Smiling warmly, I continued, "Thank you, Dad. I love you." Seeing Uncle there, the man who had stood by me like a true father, filled me with a deep sense of love and gratitude. His support had been unwavering, his presence a constant reassurance in my life. At that moment, surrounded by the family I chose and that chose me, I felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment and peace.